So now I think would be a good time in giving you what I think of the new addition to the Dead Space franchise. But then I thought, why not compare the old to the new, and see which of the two will reign supreme over the other, instead of just doing another generic review, even though most did not like my coverage of the Callisto Protocol when compared to Dead Space from 2008. But I think it will be more appropriate to do a video like this. In this video we will be comparing the two in the fields of casting and performance, gameplay, horror, story, death scenes, and finally, content. 6 different fields that will help us to decide once and for all which of the two did the best job. So, let's get into it. So you are probably wondering why I have decided to put the death scenes as a defining factor in this review. Well, most of what makes a Dead Space game are the death scenes, with the previous main entries all possessing a wide range of different and gruesome ways to kill Isaac as he delves deeper into the madness gripping the world around him, with the death scenes being something that I was most looking forward to. So how were these handled in the original? Well, the original had a lot of good deaths with just the environment, with some of the ways the world could kill, be an electrocution, doors dismembering you, flames burning you, or a gravity well pancaking you into the ceiling, turning you into red mush. But as soon as the necromorphs had grabbed you, you knew they were not messing around. The entire screen turns from that ambient lighting in the area you are located in to a grunge, dark screen with the edges being slightly blurred out, and the camera always seemed to be focused on the scene as a whole, while people were to mash a single button, and the camera would always move in conjunction with what was happening on screen. Take the Brute sequence for instance. As soon as the Brute knocks Isaac down, so does the camera fall near to the floor, demonstrating that this hulking beast is very powerful, and the camera angle being pushed down to the floor gives you this sense, which is what filmmakers do to make the villains or monsters seem that much more terrifying or powerful than they truly are. And even when the Brute is done with Isaac, the scene doesn't end, with the camera swaying back and forth, almost like it's taking in what just happened. And then the Brute takes a final breath in and silently motions to the camera, almost giving you the sense that it is mocking you, like it knows you are there, which back then the various death animations were quite the sight to behold. How does the remake fare in this category? Well, not as well as many quite hoped it would, myself included. See, the camera tint doesn't change when you are being grabbed, and the camera changes from time to time, with the camera being focused on more on pulling you away from the action rather than focusing on the scene as a whole. And sometimes you can miss the animation altogether because the camera shifts to the back of the necromorph. But here's a better comparison. The Brute sequence in the remake. See, the camera still falls to the floor when the game allows you to see the animation, but the camera is slightly further away from what is happening, and the camera sway effect is already happening, and once Isaac dies, the camera just zooms in and out very quickly, and the Brute, while doing the same thing, the game fades out to black quicker than the original did, and the Brute does not make eye contact with the player, making for a more lackluster experience. The environmental deaths aren't anything to be happy about either, with most of them just being the same end result, with Isaac being dismembered, with the main exception being Isaac suffocating. Take electrocution and being burned alive. The end result is like he had just been sliced into several pieces, which doesn't make any sense, and the tentacles crushing Isaac just leaves him laying there with a broken back, which doesn't really sell the death that well for me. In this category, the original did the experience more justice. Point 1 goes to the original Dead Space. With the original, the supporting characters Kendra and Hammond were played by Tanatsin Carmelo and Peter Mensah, and Yari Limon playing Nicole, along with Max Chappé that did the grunts, screams, and other sounds Isaac had given out. So let's break this down into sections, focusing on the main characters first. But one thing to note here is that when you look at the actors who played the characters in the original, you can see a slight resemblance to the character models, which is a plus here. However, the character's performance for Kendra and Hammond can be a little bland here, rather than feeling like these are real people that have been thrown into a nightmarish situation. I felt the characters were a bit two-dimensional, with Kendra acting like a brat for a third of the game before suddenly treating Hammond with a little ounce of her respect, while Hammond had defended her against the necromorphs and was the only one coming up with a decent plan. For Isaac, there isn't much to be said here, with the character remaining mute for 99% of the game, which adds more of a disconnect from the character, as there are moments where he should say something, but he doesn't say anything, which can take someone out of the experience. Nicole, on the other hand, we get a sense of desperation from her, however, she really does not sound like someone who has been dealing with things that the colonists had been dealing with, such as the insomnia and the depression gripping with every single day. They could feel the society around them crumbling. With other characters such as Dr. Kyne and Dr. Mercer, they felt on point and were the most consistent throughout the game, and the logs were what had sold the world out to be real, with a wide range of performances ranging from good to great to downright amazing. I actually gained more of a sense of their inner struggles and turmoil than I did with the main characters. In the remake, the characters' acting feels more three-dimensional, with the performances being on point throughout the entire casting, from the minor characters all the way to the main character Isaac, played by Gunnar Wright. Hammond in the original didn't really show any guilt or sorrow for his two men being ripped to shreds right in front of him, and he acted like he didn't much care for those around him. However, in the remake, Hammond shows more of a compassionate soul, caring for those who are under his command, so much so that he actively feels guilt towards Chen's death, with Anthony Alabi selling the role perfectly. Kendra, on the other hand, actually feels like she is trying to work with everyone to find solutions to their problems, instead of acting like another obstacle, and the twist feels more earned than the original. And actress Bridget Kelly-Canals did very well in her performance too. Like the last, Dr. Mercer and Dr. Kyne actually feel more at odds, with Kyne actually confronting Mercer, and you feel that the characters all interact with each other how they would if they were really there. For example, when Kyne is talking to Amelia right in front of Kendra, she begins saying, "Oh my god," thinking that he is truly insane. And since chapter 7, Kendra subtly gives off a sense that you are not right in the head, straight to the player, with her changes in tone and facial expressions really setting the tone for the end twist. In this category, the remake did things much better than the original. Point goes to the remake, and I have to really apologize for the actors and the actresses for getting their names wrong if I did so. I have a reputation of butchering names after all. The horror with the original was on point, with the ship possessing minimal lighting in some areas of the game. However, the lighting could have been used better, such as in most areas the lighting seemed to be working just fine, despite the ship relying on backup energy. However, the audio more than makes up for this with the ambience of nearby necromorphs moving through the vents and nearby areas, along with hearing pipes and other objects being knocked over with an echo, putting the player on edge. And when fighting the necromorphs, the audio ramps up, giving the player a sense of danger, making us feel what Isaac would be feeling from the many encounters. However, what the game does well to disturb and even scare the players is the usage of audio, text, and video logs to further ingrain the players into the world, with some making us feel sorry or bad for the characters, or even angry towards a certain doctor. The logs in their many stories and others would give us the sense of desperation the personnel would have felt at that precise moment. However, the remake does all of these things and improves upon them greatly, with the developers giving us a less is more approach with the lighting. The audio, however, remains very much the same, with the music being revamped and improved upon. And they do the same for the characters in the audio, text, and video logs. However, something that is different is the use of holograms to tell the video logs stories, allowing us to see the characters up close and personal, but also with the expanded lore the game gives us more of a sense than the original did. So for this category, I will give a point to both, as they both give off a good sense of dread, disturbing content, and really makes us feel for the torment the characters had to deal with leading up to their final moments. The gameplay of both games are really well done, however one has the edge here, with the original having a dismemberment system in place to do away with the headshot and chest shots gameplay that many horror games from around that time overused. So much so that it began to feel like formula. However, in Dead Space, going for the limbs makes perfect sense in both gameplay situations and lore aspects. See, in the lore, the necromorphs can only be immobilized by slicing off every single limb that they possess, including the head. Otherwise, the necromorph will continue to pull itself along with the skin of its teeth, quite literally. In the game, however, it made more sense for this aspect to be watered down. The HUD system was also overhauled to be placed on the back of the character to further immerse the player in their surroundings, but the way the necromorphs spawn in had been through scripted events that could become predictable over time. The remake, however, does all of this and more with the peeling system, giving players more of a gory experience with weapons melting through the skin, slicing through muscle and tendons, and breaking bones, showing through the combat, which adds to the disturbing factor. There had been a few moments when attacking the Leapers I had shot a timed mine at them, and all that was left was a skeleton being held together by a few tendons, and it looked absolutely terrifying to have one of these things coming straight at me, which was a sight to behold. The Intensity Director is another new addition that switches up the gameplay on new playthroughs and when players revisit locations they previously moved on from. The changes can include events such as enemies spawning in, new sounds being added to keep players on their toes, and even vents can malfunction and explode, with so much more to make these revisits fresh every time, with uncertainty clouding the player's mind and senses of security. The weapons in both of the games are very well done too, however the weapons in the remake are slightly better, with certain weapons gaining new abilities to make them more of use in certain scenarios. That seemingly makes more sense for them to be there, with abilities that derive from later entries or entirely new ones, like the pulse rifle having a trip mine ability, combining the detonator and the pulse rifle together for an explosive time. The line gun also deploys a laser which can be placed on walls, floors, ceilings, and even enemies for a very dynamic experience. The contact beam actually behaves like the name would suggest, and some of the upgrades are some cool additions, even though some of them just upgrade the basic assets of the weapon. Another thing that the remake does that no other Dead Space game had accomplished before was adding in the dormancy field the red marker emits into the experience, with necromorphs who get too close to the marker being enveloped in a a reddish hue, which slows them down, allowing for the player to use this aspect in certain areas of the game, which adds to the environmental advantages the player can use against the necromorphs. This point goes straight to the remake. The original game had only a few pieces of extra content after the first initial playthrough, with a difficulty called Impossible Mode that held no reward other than the bragging rights for beating the harder difficulty. A new Game Plus option was placed into the game, and a set of backstory logs could be found on the second playthrough. However, this is another category where the remake switches things up with the new Game Plus option, offering a new experience with the ability to switch the difficulty. For instance, your first playthrough could have been played on easy, and then you could choose to open your new Game Plus file on a harder difficulty, or to remain on the easier one, and the player may just find that they will encounter new types of enemies this time around. The game also holds side missions that adds to the story and isn't just there for the sake of eating up your time, with such missions like the search for Nicole's whereabouts and the birthing of the Hunter being 2 investigations. The game's boss battles had been completely overhauled to give the players more of a refreshing and dynamic battle that bosses need to offer to make them feel less generic and less like a reoccurring enemy. And the remake doesn't shy away from making the bosses much more of a fight than the predecessor did. The game also holds 2 rewards for beating the game on the hardest difficulty, so the point here goes towards the remake. And finally, we come to the story portion of this video, and at the moment it's not looking too good for the original, and I'm afraid this won't be a comeback in this entry, as the original story was very much of a lackluster one, with the intended route they went with it, being having characters disappear from time to time, characters that simply sounded as if they didn't care too much for their current plight, and story beats being quite poor in all aspects. The only parts of the story I really cared for were the logs, as they held more of a story than the main plot, which isn't how you want this to be in your game, as the logs should only really be an aspect that supports the main plot, not taking over for the main plot. And this really derives from the whole genre's shortcomings, with Glen Schofield even saying that if you explain how things work, it becomes less scary, but if you hold back completely, not explaining things in the story, it becomes less scary and more lackluster. You need to have a good balance for that approach to work. The remake, however, puts this all to shame, with the main plot always being there with you, haunting you, with the cast helping to guide players through the halls of the Ishimura. The logs are good, but don't take over the story and helps to support it, along with the side missions helping players to work out what really happened on board the Ishimura prior to their arrival. The twist even got an overhaul, with Elizabeth and Isaac being the puppets of the marker, where Isaac thought he was seeing Nicole, he was actually seeing Elizabeth, and same for her with Temple, which had been a nice touch. In the original, we didn't really understand if Kyne meant to kill the captain despite of what we see in Downfall. However, here it can be seen that the captain lunges towards him, with the captain's death being the fault of himself, not Kyne's. And the log further shows how bad things had gotten, with the crew being reasonable at one moment and then overly delusional the next. The story here overly gels together, and when the characters disappear, they always reappear with the justification of where they had been, with updates to what they had found or where they were. Another point goes straight to the remake. Whilst the original had been great for what it had been back in 2008 with a lot to offer players, I certainly wouldn't call it a bad game, but the remake more certainly made the experience even more refined, with the excellent choice of casting, writing, and the performances given by the entire team. Makes this remake a work of art, and just goes to show that EA, when they want to, can still produce great products. An EA motive in their time of making their first attempt at recreating Dead Space did an amazing job, and really should be proud of what they have been able to accomplish in the last 2 years. The winner is Dead Space 2023. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, then hit the like button. Comment your thoughts below and I look forward to hearing from you. Sign up to join the British Alliance today by hitting the subscribe button and ringing in the notification bell so you are always notified whenever a new video pops up. A special thank you to all of my channel members for your extra support. You help me to create more content for others to enjoy and I really appreciate you. And if you would like to become a channel member today, then hit that join button and select which of the tiers takes your fancy. And I will see all of you among the cosmos, and be sure to have a good one.